You're listening to the Crochet Conversations podcast with Ines and Mel, and this is episode 28, The Wonderful World of Granny Squares. Hello and welcome back to another episode.
Hello guys!
So before we start this episode, I want to tell you guys something. I realized that we forgot to mention this in the previous episode, but it's exciting news. So if you don't already know, we are actually having a little pop-up event happening in Singapore here right now.
Yeah, correct.
Okay, it's already started, unfortunately, we forgot to say, but if you're listening to this episode today, which is Sunday, 12 December, then you still have time to come down and catch us at this event.
And so far we've seen so many of you guys at the event and we're so happy to see you.
Yeah, also because it's been a while, right, since we've actually spoken to you guys. Okay, so here are the details. This event we're doing is a Christmas market. It's the Etsy Craftivist Christmas Market in collaboration with Curbside Crafters. It runs from Friday, Saturday, Sunday, 10 to 12 December, starting at 12 p.m. to 9 p.m. It's at 730 North Bridge Road. It's like a little shop house on its own, and it's 3 levels, and there's food on the first level and like 2 other levels, and we're in one of those levels. So come by and say hi. So far it's been really, really fun, like such a break from the monotonous, work from home lifestyle.
Yeah, exactly. And because it's been a while, it's so, it's so refreshing and so exciting to, be out and meet you guys.
It's kind of tiring, right? But I think so far we're enjoying it. It's a kind of like rush exhaustion that we really enjoy. It's like we work well under pressure, and this is just, anyway, it's just wonderful. So come by and say hi. We want to talk to you guys. Okay, and now that we've gotten that out of the way, let's jump right into this episode. So I originally wanted to leave it as a quick questions, but I've decided against it because this question was submitted from a long-time customer and listener of our podcast, and she suggested an episode all about granny squares.
Yeah.
So it wasn't really a question per se, but kind of like a suggestion of things we could talk about. And I thought that it was wonderful because granny squares are so versatile.
Exactly.
Right? And it's, and in fact, it's one of those things I teach in my classes, one of the earlier things I teach in my classes, even before I go into teaching like circles, for example.
Yeah, and I am so excited about this episode because one of my earlier projects was using granny squares. Yeah.
And I remember the nightmare that you went through, but like the rewards, it's so rewarding, right?
Yeah.
To finally finish a project.
Yeah.
So we're going to break down today what granny squares are and all the different things you can do with it. And it's my personal belief that if you could only learn one thing, master the granny square. If you could only learn one thing in crochet, that is, you could just learn the granny square, and there is almost nothing that is limited to you.
Yeah. When I was doing research for this, you cannot believe the number of things you can create just with purely using granny squares.
Yeah, just with the granny square. And that's crazy to think. But basically, okay, you know what? Let's wait for this and let's break it down in this episode. Let's first define what a granny square is. And I think a lot of people hear the word granny square and think it's some weird, complicated, ugly, old-fashioned thing. But actually, they can be so wonderful and modern and beautiful, right? So what is a granny square in crochet? As the name suggests, it's a square piece of something.
Yep.
And it's a little square built up from the center. So it's not like you do, the start with the X number of chains and you build upwards in rows, kind of like a rectangle.
Right.
In a granny square, you start from like a middle point and you start building outwards like in a radial sort of formation. And you create 4 sides. And every row you do, you add 1 more row to each side. And they're just little tiny squares made up of regular, all the basic stitches. Could be single, double, half double. The most basic ones are a 3DC cluster stitch pattern.
Yeah.
And it's just basically that. That's just one kind of a basic square. You can go as complex as something really, really, like starting from a mandala and building upwards. You could do all sorts of things with granny square. really the sky's the limit with this, because it's down to your imagination.
Really endless possibilities.
And color choices and range. It can be as minimal as you want to, the whole square in one color, or you could change colors in every row. And that's basically what a granny square is.
Okay, so now that we know what a granny square is,
okay,
do you know why granny square is called granny squares?
I have thought about that, honestly, but I just assume it's, a square because it's a square, and granny because it's kind of old-fashioned looking.
Okay.
Or maybe it's like traditional. I've never really thought about why it's called.
To go and find out why it's called that.
Yeah, but I do have some people ask me that after I talk or describe what a granny square is, then they always say, but okay, so why is it called a granny square?
Yeah.
Or if I tell them you could do this in granny square, and then they give me a look and they say, I don't really want anything that's like granny looking though.
Right. And that would be the first thought, right?
Yeah, that's my first thought too, to be honest.
Yeah. Okay, well, the real story is in the 1900s. Grandmothers,
wow, the 1900s.
Yeah.
Okay.
Grandmothers would find like scraps of yarn. They would keep them because yarn was not readily available, so it was very expensive to get yarn then.
Especially like a brand new ball of yarn for them, it's kind of like really, really like a month's worth of salary.
Yeah, exactly. So they would save up these scraps, and then they found out that they can turn it into like mini squares. And then they can put them together, sew them together to turn it into
larger,
something bigger, like blankets that were more functional then.
And where would they get this scrap of yarn? Like, would they just like collect them over time, or
Yeah, they would collect them either from like old clothing, old fabric,
or like old blankets?
Exactly. Yeah. So when they pull up a part, then they realize they can actually put it together to make something else.
I love that it's born out of something so practical and functional.
Yeah.
I love that. It's like it gives it such a rich history behind just the word granny square.
Yeah, exactly. And
because we're not talking about grannies like our grandparents. We're talking about like real grannies, like 1900s.
Yeah, the 1900s.
In Victorian dresses type real grannies.
Yeah. And the way they made the granny squares, right? The pattern itself, it doesn't take like somebody who needs to see very well or to like work very fast with their hands in order to make them.
Oh, okay, you're right. That makes sense, because that's one of the first few things I teach in my class, because I feel like it doesn't take somebody a very huge amount of like skill or time to master the granny square. And it's because it's so easy, it's such a great confidence booster as well.
Right.
And it doesn't take much yarn.
Yeah.
Which makes sense to me now.
Exactly. So when I was reading about this, it does make so much sense to me where they say that you can, like, using granny squares is such a good way to use up your scraps of yarn. Yeah,
yes,
exactly.
yes. I do know of most people talking about granny squares, and it's always in the context of using up scrap yarn.
Yeah.
And I have tried to do that myself to,
Yeah.
Unfortunately, it doesn't work, because then I start thinking about what other color schemes I want. I feel very stifled when it's just limited to my scrap yarn.
Right.
Also because I've got a lot of yarn, so my scraps really don't match. But I could totally see where the name comes from and how it sort of adds to the rich history of crochet. And crochet, it's already quite, exciting on its own.
Yeah.
Okay, I think that was really interesting. So let's hop right into like the real meat of it, really talk about granny squares. And I just want to start off by saying granny squares could be any size, like they could be large or small, right?
Okay,
as with any project that we do. But the idea of using 3DC clusters, it's not just limited to squares, and I think that is where like the modern day definition of granny square really changes, because it's no longer just squares. In fact, using the 3DC cluster granny square type of pattern, you could create all sorts of shapes.
Yeah, and I've seen those.
Right, and so it's kind of confusing when I say, oh, it's a granny square, but like it's a rectangle.
Yeah, or then, a triangle.
Or triangle, and my students go, so it's a granny rectangle? And I'm like, kind of yes, but we're just modifying the square into a rectangle.
Yeah.
So here are just some of the shapes that you can do, or you can create using the 3DC cluster granny square stitch. You can make obviously a square. You could make rectangles. You could even make hexagons out of them, like star shapes. They could even be done in triangle shapes.
Wow, star shapes.
Or circles.
Yes, I've seen the circle ones.
And the circles one are I love the idea of turning circles into squares just with the basic stitches, which is totally what granny squares are about now. You know, it's no longer, since the 1900s. It's no longer just one basic type of granny square stitch.
And that's why I think crochet is so amazing. You can turn something that's called a square into not a square. Using the exact same pattern,
And there are just, I don't want to say millions, so maybe thousands of designs of granny squares out there. You can just walk into any like craft store, and if they do carry crochet pattern books, they usually always carry like a granny square book.
Right.
And it's like 500 granny squares to try.
Yeah.
Or like 1,000. I don't know if I've ever seen 1,000, but off the top of my head, I think there could be 1,000.
Yeah.
We should totally make this a challenge that everyone comes together and creates their own version of a granny square.
Okay.
I think that would be quite exciting, but So anyway, just like if you just do a basic search on YouTube, there is a YouTube channel. I don't remember the name, but just type out 365 days of granny square.
Okay.
And it's basically this really lovely lady with the help of, I think, her father who helped her film. She basically did one granny square every day of the year.
A different one?
A different one every day of the year. And she sort of did it in a playlist, so one video is one granny square, and she labels them day 1, day 2, day 3, day 200, and day 365. And the idea is to collect all these granny squares and put them into like a blanket at a later stage.
Okay.
But every one of them is different, and they're really cute because they're themed. So if it's like Easter, she does an Easter themed granny square.
Right, because in the whole year you have like different festivities
seasons,
and all that. Yeah.
And her commitment to stick through that is crazy. I think when I first started learning crochet, when I first stumbled across this video, I actually did try. I did
to do one every day.
I did like 2 a day.
Okay.
For like the first 5 days.
Okay.
Yeah, week, yeah. And then I got bored because, and I tried to piece them together. The only problem is that it's kind of hard to sew them together because the stitch counts don't all match up.
Right, because it's a different pattern.
It's a different pattern, but it just goes to show the amount of versatility you get with just a basic idea of a granny square.
Right.
So maybe let's give some examples, kind of like, what are the things that you can do with granny squares.
Okay, yeah.
This sort of reminds me of our Christmas edition where I'm just listing things out to make.
Things you can make,
And then that's just getting me thinking about all the things I want to start.
Yeah.
But I will control myself. And all my research is purely for the sake of this episode, okay?
Okay.
I promise to not start any whips with granny squares because I bet after this episode I will.
Yeah.
Okay, so we could make... so basically granny squares is just you making lots of squares and tiling them together, basically. Like floor
putting
tiles,
them together. Right.
And if you think about all the ways you can use floor tiles, they could be on the floor, they could be on the wall, they could be on the countertop, and it's just really based on your imagination, or like it's your creativity would determine where it goes. You can even tile the ceiling, I mean, if that's what you want to, and if that's the look you want. You have big and small and different shapes and whatnot, and granny squares are very similar to that.
Right.
Okay, so let's say if you make like smaller granny squares and you make a lot of them, you could piece them into something as simple as a blanket. I think that's kind of like the most basic,
most common, right?
And I think the fun of that is being able to choose your color scheme. So you could have like a solid color granny square, but like have maybe 4 colors, and you just alternate the colors you put, similar to your granny square cardigan that you did.
Yeah, correct.
Right, you had light blue, a medium blue, and a grey.
Yeah, and a grey, yeah.
Right, and so you could do that and make like a blanket. I think that's the most basic thing. If you don't want it to be so large like a blanket, it could be just a throw for your sofa.
Yeah.
Something for you to sit on your sofa and cover yourself with. So that's one option that you could use with granny squares. Another option would be if you want something more functional. You could make a scarf out of a granny square.
Yep, I've seen those, yeah.
You can make tinier, smaller, squares and piece them together in a scarf. And because you're sewing them together, you have the option of doing one long one long scarf, or like those infinity scarves, the kind that goes in a loop.
Yeah, and I guess you can always just add on, to the length if you want.
To the length, if you're not making it in a loop, but you could add on to the length, you could add on to the width of it. And as part of our brand, we offer a granny square blanket.
Yeah.
And we call it like the growing blanket, because the idea is you buy a certain amount of squares, we stitch them into a blanket for you, and as your child grows older, you could just get more squares and add on to your piece. And one day it's going to be large enough for your child, and it just grows with your child. So that's sort of the concept or the idea that we love about tiling together granny squares.
Yeah.
And you're not under any pressure to finish it all at once. If you stop at any moment, you're still going to have like a blanket somewhat.
Yeah, correct. And if it's a blanket, then it's still functional, sort of.
Yeah, it's just a small blanket.
Yeah.
Right? But it can grow as big or as long, and you can change it to a square if you want to, maybe like 50 by 50 squares. Or if you decide that's not what you want, you could just add on extra squares on one side, and make it like a rectangle.
Change it a little bit, yeah.
Yeah, and I think it's quite nice to sort of like mark the seasons and change as you go through with that, and you sort of chart your journey through crochet. When I do this granny square with my students, the very first few squares they create look a little bit, Right. But as they go on, like the quality of their work just improves, and it's so nice to see. It's like it charts their progress.
Right. Okay.
Through the blankets. So that's something you could do, right? If you want to do together, like put together really small ones. Another option would be if you create one larger granny square.
Okay.
Say like
one huge square.
Yeah, say like 15 by 15. So you just keep building onto your granny square until it's much larger. And you could do 2 of those and make it into a pillowcase.
Yeah, I can totally see that, yes.
Right? Or if you don't mind like a box top, you could just do 2 granny squares and seam the sides together and a little bit of the top portion, and you could wear them like a scoop neck kind of top, but made in granny square.
Yeah, I'm trying to visualize that, and it's so simple, but yet it works.
But yet it works, yeah. And if you are comfortable with doing it in the rectangle shape, you could use a much sturdier material and create like a floor mat.
Wow, that's smart.
And you could just, because you make them, you could synchronize all of them. Like you can match all the colors across your house, or have one for every season, and it's so much cheaper. What we like to do is to take our old like jersey material t-shirts or old like fashion clothes we don't want. We cut them into strips and we create a floor mat out of t-shirt yarn.
Yeah.
If you're more adventurous and you don't just want to create like a flat piece of something, you could make lots of granny squares and tile them or put them together in a cardigan.
Like me.
Like you, yeah. And that requires just a little bit more time and effort, because you're not just creating one flat 2D piece of like fabric.
Yeah.
Right? You actually need to think about structure and shape and
how you're supposed to tile it together to make it into like a wearable cardigan.
Yeah. And you could do that. It could be as big or as small. And I think, if it's possible for you to start small, do it for like a child or like an infant.
Right.
Because I tell you, it sounds fun, but when you're actually piecing them and stitching them together, it's all 4 sides multiplied by the number of squares you have. And it can be quite, tedious. And if you don't drink, if you are... if you're not somebody who drinks alcohol, then you have to do it sober, and I think that's quite a torture.
But it's better to do it sober, I guess, because when you start having to piece them all together and sew them in all together, you really need that patience and that focus to do it.
I'm more patient when I'm not sober.
Right, I see.
So why don't you share a little bit about your experience making that granny square cardigan? Because from my point of view, I think you lost a lot of hair because you're constantly tugging at your hair and you're constantly complaining about how difficult it is, and I feel your pain because I know how hard it is.
I think that the idea is not making the granny square that was difficult. is the idea that I have to put it together and, you know, having that design aspect to it as well.
Oh yeah, you did take some time to
figure out, you know, how should I tile it properly, what color combinations I should go for, and I was a bit adventurous. I think I decided to color change my granny squares.
Yeah. So okay, so basically you had some that are solid colors and some that are multicolored squares.
Yeah. So, you know, you were telling me that I can have multiple colors, and I got excited and I picked like, okay, I want many of my tiles to be multicolor, and I think that, you know, caused me a lot of stress afterwards.
And I think also, correct me if I'm wrong, but the biggest nightmare I think for you was sewing in all the tails.
Yeah, it was unexpected, I think. I don't know that. Do you know to think that it was going to have that many tails?
It looked before she sewed in her tails, it looked like a monster.
Yeah.
With all the little tentacle tails sticking out.
And this was even before sewing them together. You know, I had to deal with those ends first.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I think that really stressed me out. But after I got that out of the way, putting them all together was not as difficult, you know.
So as a beginner, how long do you think, maybe you can give like our listeners an idea of how long you think you took to, you know, from start to finish, how many hours you think you put into your work and how many days?
I think I would say I took about a month or so. Every day I would work maybe a couple of hours, you know, my free time off work to do that.
Yeah, and also because we have our full-time job, right, which is this. So this was like your personal project, right?
Yeah.
Nothing to do with our work.
Yeah. I mean, I did get faster over time making the granny squares. I think I spent most of my time designing and figuring out like how many more, you know, multicolored squares should I make, how many of the solid colors should I make to make sure that, you know, I had the design in place already as I was building the cardigan.
I don't think, I agree with you. I don't think actually making the individual square was difficult for you, right?
Yeah, it was more of the planning stage, I think.
And the finishing up stage.
Yeah, for sure.
The sewing it together. And to give you guys an idea, like, so we work basic working hours, or at least that's the hours that we've set aside. We work in the day, and then around like 6 or 7 p.m. we end work, and I think that's after dinner, and that's when you start working on your project, right?
Yeah. Correct.
So I think that for like you listeners out there, it mimics your working hours, and when you come home, you know, like working 1 or 2 hours a day in between, you know, your own life priorities and like whatever other things you have going on.
Yeah.
I think 1 month for you was sort of like a realistic idea of working at it every day.
Yeah, correct. And I didn't want to rush through it as well.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah, and it shows when you don't rush through it because your piece is so nice.
Yeah.
You know,
yeah, I was really happy with the end product.
And actually, I started my granny square. I was going to do a solid colored granny square. I started my granny square around the same time as you.
Yeah.
And I'm really ashamed to say that it's not even halfway done.
Yeah, but I'm a one whip girl, right? So
yeah, I'm not. I'm a poly whip, you know, girl. So I have all my light blue granny squares sort of tucked away in like a zippy bag. And, you know, I probably need to find where it is now because I don't know where it is now.
Yeah, but definitely it's a realistic project to go for as a beginner, I would say. It was pretty simple to get on the pattern and to create like multiple squares at a time.
I agree with you, and I think that this granny square, if you are a really new beginner, a granny square would be perfect because you get to practice your stitches, especially your tension as you go along, and you start to understand the importance of having the same kind of tension in every square.
Yes, yeah, you're right, correct.
Right, because as you were working through it, I realized that one of the issues that you were facing, or one of the issues you were coming to me with, was that even though your squares are the exact same number of rows and exact same number of stitches,
yeah, sometimes they just don't match up. Like
the sizing of it don't match. And so if you are a beginner, like almost like a complete beginner could even do this, right? And you could spend a month just getting familiar with the different stitches. And of course, Mel is sort of taller and she has broader shoulders, so she definitely needs more squares.
Yeah, a lot bigger, yeah.
But if you're someone that's a little bit more petite or much smaller size, then you don't have to make so many, squares. Or if you want to create this for a child, of course, it's easier with lesser squares, right?
And of course, at the beginning, we always say it's important to swatch first. So I needed to know my, one
tension,
square would, measurement in terms of sizing, how many I would need for maybe my shoulder length and things like that.
Maybe we could have an episode talking about how to put together a granny square cardigan. What do you think?
Yeah.
Let me know what you guys think. If you guys want to listen to that, leave us a comment on our Instagram. We are at CrochetSG, and I love to put that together for you guys.
Yeah.
Okay, so that's talking about putting together something a little bit more complex, right? Another thing you could do that's like a wearable, and I think it's a trend now, are bucket hats. And I have seen people create like circles for the top of the bucket hat.
Okay.
And then 4 or 5 granny squares for the sides of it. And so they connect these 4 or 5 granny squares in like a circle, connect it to the main circle, and then crochet a little border, and that's like a granny square.
Oh,
like
wow.
a granny square bucket hat.
Okay, wow. So that's quite cute, yeah?
Yeah, and
pattern.
they do it all in one color, so it looks really modern because it's like
Right.
monochromatic. And I really like that idea. I just don't know whether I can pull off a granny square bucket hat.
Right.
I don't know whether I can pull off hats, right? So I haven't tried, but I have done a few of these custom orders for some of our customers.
Yes, yeah.
Other things that you could make with these granny squares are if you make different sizes of granny squares, all you have to do is make 2 of them. You can seam all 3 sides and leave one opening, and that could be a bag.
Right, like a mini pouch.
Like a mini pouch. Oh, it could be large. It doesn't have to be mini, right?
Oh,
It
right,
depends
right.
on how big you want it to be.
Yeah.
You could just have 2 larger pieces, maybe like 12 inches by 12 inches, seam 3 sides, add a strap. It could be like a crossbody or, just over the shoulder kind of bag that you could carry to the market, to the farmer's market or something.
Yeah, what a simple design.
And it's easy, and you could do them in different colors, and they make such wonderful gifts, Christmas gifts.
There you go.
Right, if you haven't yet started on your Christmas presents, we did a Christmas episode earlier. This could totally be one of those things that you do.
And the best thing is, it wouldn't take you too long. So if you start now, you definitely can make it by Christmas.
Yes, I think one of the amazing things about making granny square bag like this is you could do it in maybe, would an hour be ambitious? In a day.
Okay,
you
maybe,
could do it in a day.
Yeah.
You could probably do 2 in a day.
Yeah.
So they're easy and they're fast and they're fun. I think that's
It is fun. It is fun.
Yeah, I agree. And this is just the basic square, the basic granny square or rectangle. We briefly touched on it.
Yeah.
But let's talk about granny square modifications. Right, so you can use the granny square stitch like we talked about, but it doesn't have to be a square. And so let's talk a little bit about what other things you could do with it, right? So I like to call them the One Piece Modification.
One Piece Modification.
Yeah,
right.
It's like my own term. I don't even think this term really exists, but it's basically manipulating one granny square into something else. So I think one of the famous projects, it's quite widely known, is the granny square bottom bag.
Okay.
And when I teach this in my class and I tell them we're going to be making a granny square bottom bag, it's the word granny and bottom in one sentence that sort of raises eyebrows a little bit. But then I have to explain, no, it looks really nice and modern. If you choose it all in like a nice cream color, it could look like a beach bag,
Yeah. Don't ignore the term and the words used for this.
Yeah, so it's just a granny square because it uses the basis of a granny square stitch, and it's called a granny square bottom bag because you build it from the bottom up.
That's it. Right. Okay, that makes sense now.
So basically you create a square to the size of the base that you want, and all you do is skip the center 2 clusters of every row, and you keep building up that way.
Okay.
Because in a granny square, by building, 2 clusters separated by 2 chains in the corners, you increase every row by two clusters.
Yeah.
And by decreasing 2 clusters in the center, you keep your cluster count even, and so that builds it upwards in the bag instead of expanding outwards in a square.
Right. Okay.
So
I
that's
see what you
kind of
mean,
like
yeah.
a modification. In fact, if you just type in Ravelry or in Google, I'm sure that you could find lots and lots of granny square bottom bag designs, or even YouTube. I'm sure that you'll find a few on YouTube, right? So that's one of them. Another modification that you could do is if you are familiar with creating hexagons, granny square hexagons. So it's no different than creating a regular granny square. Instead of 4 sides, you create 6 sides.
Oh, okay.
Right, and by creating 6 sides, you put in a lot more fabric and so the work buckles, right? But for some reason in the hexagon, it buckles in a way that you could fold it over and make like a half a T shape, like an L shape.
Right.
And you combine 2 L shapes to make a cardigan.
I can see that. I think I've seen those patterns and designs before.
Yeah, and on Pinterest, there are so many of these granny square hexagon cardigan patterns in like really chunky yarn. And it's all these light, pretty pastel colors.
Right.
And I really think crochet clothing is making a comeback with the younger generation.
Yeah. I think
like
it is, yeah.
Those born in the 90s. And I know, we are born in the 80s, so, you know, granny squares and crochet was kind of old-fashioned for us.
Then, yeah.
But I think those born in the 90s and, you know, beyond are starting to look at it as something that's, like, really fashionable and chic.
Yeah.
And I think that this granny square hexagon cardigan, that's quite a mouthful.
Yeah, it is.
Is wonderful. It's perfect and it builds up so quickly because it's a granny square base.
You know, from the look of it, you wouldn't think that it's a granny square, to be honest.
Yeah, that's true because it folds in such a way.
Yeah.
All you see are the little nice 3DC clusters.
Yeah, right.
Which makes it so wonderful. But at the root of it, it's a very simple construction. You could do it in a day, basically.
Really? Wow.
Yeah, you could do it in a day.
Okay.
And it doesn't take that much yarn. I think maybe 400 to 500 grams. And for a cardigan, I think that's quite good. Yeah. I know that there are plenty of these patterns on Ravelry.
Okay.
So you just type in Ravelry crochet cardigan or like crochet hexagon granny square cardigan. That's quite a mouthful. But yeah, search it up and you'll be able to find many patterns that you could try.
Okay, I'll go look it up.
Are you really? Are you going to start another cardigan?
Maybe.
I know that. So Mel did say to me off this recording, she said, wow, now I want to try making something myself. And I said, oh, do you remember how much you struggled in the previous one?
I know, but I mean, granny square is fun. And I think I know after doing that cardigan, I'm quite pretty, you know, used to doing granny squares.
And you've forgotten how terrible it is. And no, okay, let me just explain myself. It's not terrible. It's just that, you know, sewing in all the ends, you know, sewing in 2 ends in every project is difficult enough.
Yeah.
Nobody crochets to sew in ends.
Well,
right?
That's true.
So I think doing like a granny square requires a lot of tails and a lot of yarn.
Yeah.
And a lot of yarn to sew in, you know, not really just to create the work.
Yeah, just gotta be mentally prepared for that. But looking at how many, you know, items and different kind of, you know, products that I can make with granny square, I'm getting a little bit excited wanting to try and come up with like my next new project.
I think what I'll do is I won't start a granny square project, but I might now. I may be feeling inspired to finish my granny square.
Oh, please,
cardigan.
Yes. Yeah, you should do that.
The one that I started with you. And this granny square cardigan that I'm making for myself is a light blue cardigan that was made in order to specifically match a blue and white dress that I have.
Yeah, I remember that.
Yeah, and it's like a thin spaghetti strap top with like a bustier and like an A-line skirt. And so I wanted a cardigan that I could wear that sort of matches, and just so happens this blue yarn matches almost identically the blue patterns in my white dress. And I thought, wow, that's perfect. I could wear it out for, you know, this particular dinner we were going to.
Yeah.
The dinner came and went.
You were doing so well though at the beginning.
I finished the back panel. Okay, that's all I did, let's be honest. And the dinner came and went, and my cardigan is not finished. And I thought, okay, now I have no reason to finish it because I'm not in a rush. And it's just been sitting there for like half a year.
You know, when I was doing my cardigan, I thought it would motivate you to finish yours as well.
Actually, it didn't. I saw how much you struggled and I thought I never...
Okay. It had the opposite effect then.
I don't want to do that. I don't want to go through that. And clearly I didn't because my work is not done. But I shall disclaim it out in this episode that I will try to finish it, and maybe you guys can hold me accountable. You know what? If I don't post updates in like a month's time, Just send me lots of messages and like public comments saying, show me your finished cardigan.
Yeah, exactly. That's all you gotta say. Show me your cardigan and she'll probably be motivated to do it then.
Okay, so let's quickly move on from this topic because I'm feeling a little bit stressed now.
Pressured.
So in the topic of, granny square modifications, you could also do triangles.
Yeah.
Right? And if you're thinking about home decor, which I love, you could make lots of triangle granny squares and put them together in like a little bunting. Or like a window, like above the baby's crib or above your bed. Or
yeah, you can do like tiny little mini ones.
Yeah, and you could color match them. You could, match them to the theme of your house. Or if it's like Halloween, it could be black and orange.
Right.
Or if it's Christmas, it could be, green and red.
Yeah,
or
and like put it along the Christmas tree or something.
Yeah, and I think that's wonderful. That's beautiful. Another thing is maybe like this is if you are a little bit more intermediate to advanced, right? You could turn mandalas, like round mandala patterns, into granny squares. And I think that's the beauty of granny squares, or at least that's our modern interpretation of a granny square.
Yeah.
You basically can turn anything into a granny square.
Wow, okay.
Let me give you an example. I think there's this crochet brand out there called One Dog Wolf, and she created like little monstera leaves. So they are 3D looking leaves, like monstera leaves, those really nice big leaves. And all she did was crochet around it in a certain formation to create a square. And then from there, you just build it up into a granny square. And I've seen some pictures of completed projects from her customers and her followers of green monstera leaves surrounded by a white background. And it's done up in a blanket, and it's so beautiful to see a nice white light cream looking blanket with lots of little green leaves in it.
Wow.
Other people I've seen, they create like really nice intricate round mandalas.
Yeah.
And all they do is just use double and treble crochets around it to create like a square.
Wow.
And from that, you get a granny square.
Yeah.
So it's no longer just making a granny square in a particular pattern, you know. Some of the more intricate ones are actually mandalas. And I think mandalas are so easy to make because it's just one series of pattern.
Yeah.
And you just repeat that 12 or 8 or 6 or however many times you need to.
I think it's so amazing that you give such good examples to show how granny square can be basic and simple and also go up to become something a little bit more complex.
Yeah, and also I think crochet is sort of evolving, and part of, what our brand is to sort of promote crochet in a modern and accessible way.
Exactly.
It's no longer granny and brown and purple.
Yeah, despite the name, it's so, versatile.
And modern, but that's what I love about it. And some of my favorite patterns or Pinterest images that catch my eye are in fact granny squares.
Yeah, correct, same.
It's just done in like a light cream or a light grey, and they look so wearable and so like fresh. It's not ugly. It's not, it's
granny.
not granny looking. No offense to the grannies out there, okay? Because grannies really crochet the best.
Yeah.
So those are some things you can do with granny squares. And, if you want to talk about being a little bit more advanced, for you advanced listeners out there, you probably already know this, but you could dabble into mosaic granny squares or overlay crochet.
Wow.
Which is basically a lot of front post and back post double or treble crochets to make it look like little trackings or cable knits or cables around one granny square.
I see.
And it looks so Moroccan tile-ish, and it's so beautiful. I love mosaic overlay, crochet.
Yeah.
And done in a granny square, it looks so complex. It looks so intricate and so rich.
So now I can understand why you say if there's one thing that I've got to learn in crochet, it would be the granny square.
Yeah, exactly. Because you could, if you think about anything in crochet and you don't know how to build it up in construction in one continuous strand, a good option is to just do many, many squares, and you can just piece them together like puzzle pieces.
Yeah, it really depends on how creative you can be, and you can make anything.
Yeah. Okay, so here's a tip for you guys, right? I just thought about it.
Okay.
Here's a tip for you guys. If you want to try out making granny square, but you don't want to actually crochet it and you want to just piece them together, all you have to do is just cut out small squares of paper and then just tape them together in how you think the construction will be. And then that will give you an idea of how many squares you need. You could even use different colored paper cut out, to correspond with the color of yarn. Say if you're doing a granny square cardigan, you could do like 20 pieces of squares for the back panel, and then maybe however many you need for the front panel and the sleeves, and just use tape, just regular sticky tape.
Yeah,
tape the sides
put
together,
it all together.
And then you have like a mini 3D model of what your actual work will look like. And if you feel like you could put in the work for that, or if you feel like you want to modify something, you can do it there and then. So that's sort of your proof of concept, or
your pre-planning before you actually do it.
Yeah, you're planning before you actually start the work. And I think that is, it's a really good way to just start to dabble or let the idea conceive and take root in your mind before you actually start to crochet it.
Yeah, that's smart.
And that's just it. That's just all there is to the wonderful world of Granny
Squares.
It's so simple, but it produces such complex ideas and products, and it's just really down to your creativity, how young and fresh and modern or traditional you want it to look.
Yeah, exactly. I hope like after this, listening to this episode, you guys have, newfound love for granny squares.
And ideas.
Yeah, and as excited as me to try, different projects with using granny squares.
And so if you guys are gonna try anything or start anything, not that I want to contribute to any existing whips, but if you do try something, I want to know and I want to see. So take a photo of it and tag us on Instagram. We are at Crooked Crochet SG. And before we end this episode, again, I want to remind you guys that we will be at this event that you can come by and say hi to us. Right, it's the Etsy Craftaviz Christmas Market in collaboration with Curbside Crafters. We are on our last day here. It's Sunday, 12 December, and this event was running from Friday. So it's 10, 11, 12 December from 12 noon to 9 p.m. We are at 730 North Bridge Road. It's like a little small building of its own. So come by and say hi. It's been really fun talking to you guys. It's tiring, but I love it. It's so exciting. And if you're already following us on Instagram, you will see that we've been posting lots of updates and, videos of you guys coming by and saying hi. And I'm just thriving in this environment. So come by and say hi. But if you're not in Singapore and you can't come find us, you can just find us on our Instagram and say hi, and we'd still love to talk to you there. In fact, you might need to tell me to shut up, right? And you can find us on Instagram or Facebook. We are at Crooked Crochet SG, but I think for this week, find us on our Instagram might be better. Or you can WhatsApp us. We are +65 9127 2743. And if you're in Singapore, you can just omit the +65.
Yeah. You can email us as well on crookedcrochetsg@gmail.com.
And once again, check back every Sunday at 12 noon. New episodes get released then, and you can listen to us on, I think, Apple too, right? I think recently we put ourselves up on Apple, and I've been meaning to tell you guys, but I forgot. So it's not just on Spotify, but you can find us on Apple Podcasts as well, which is so exciting. Yay. I don't know why we didn't, do our checks and we only recently realized that, we're not on it. So now we are.
We got on it already.
So we'll see you then next week in our next episode. Until then, I hope you have a good time crocheting lots of granny squares.
Granny squares for the win. Bye, guys.